I'm a bit surprised Cocoron hasn't gotten a lot of attention outside of Japan. It's one of the most distinctive and accessible Famicom games to not be released outside of the country. I would have thought it'd be a mainstay of videos that have titles like 9 awesome games that never came to the US, or 12 Japanese NES games that you don't know about. But Cocoron lingers in obscurity outside of Japan. While in the country, it's heralded as one of the Famicom's hidden gems. The plot of the game has you as a dreamer taken off to Dreamland, where there's a kidnapped princess and a fairy that's been abducted, and it becomes your job to save everyone. When you start Cocoron, the very first thing you do is make a character. The game is a side-scrolling action platformer, but it doesn't have one singular hero. Instead, you choose a head, body, and weapon. All of this equipment has weight, and the less that you weigh, the faster you move and the higher you can jump. The head and body have durability, and the higher that is, the more hit points you have. On top of that, all of the heads have a unique power that's activated by collecting a special item. 2 of the bodies are able to fly, and 1 of them is able to float. And all of the weapons have distinct properties. You can mix and match everything freely. Once you've chosen the components you want to use, you give the character a name, and then you have your choice of 5 stages. And the world map is actually a bit more complicated than it appears. It always displays as a central hub of your house, and then 5 points to go to. But the world is larger than that. There's also a ring path around the outer edge. The way that the world map works is that once you reach one of those nodes, you pick the next node that you want to travel to. And while you can't wander back and forth freely, the levels are consistent. If you go from your house to the end of one path and then choose to go back, then you play the same stage backwards. Why would you want to do that? Well, the spokes to and from your home are easier levels than the ones on the wheel. And returning to your home saves your progress. Cocoron has a battery save, and even though this is a relatively short game, it's still pretty useful. Because the hero that you created at the start isn't the only hero that you'll create, and all of your heroes level up. The 5 marked points that you start out with all have a boss with them, and if you can defeat that boss, then you get to make another character, which means by the end of the game, you'll have 6. Once you defeat the 5th boss, then you can locate the princess hidden somewhere on that outer ring. When you defeat an enemy, it leaves behind an egg, and those eggs can contain 3 things. First, it can contain a heart that restores some of your life. Second, it can contain an orb, and what the orb does depends on the head your character is using. The ninja becomes invincible, and the robot recovers all of its health, to use 2 examples. The other thing that could drop is an icon representing your weapon. Every time you collect 5 of those symbols, your weapon powers up. The first 2 power-ups increase the size and strength of the weapon, while the final 2 levels of power-ups increase the quantity that you throw. To briefly run these down, the parasol fires upward after a short period. The boomerang is exactly what you'd expect, and honestly is a pretty good balance between weight, damage, and rate of fire. The shuriken is a straight shot, but as it powers up, it goes at 90-degree angles. The baseballs are also a straight shot, but they bounce off of terrain and can even roll up slopes. The pencils also fire forward, but the advantage of them is that the shots penetrate terrain. Crystals get tossed like a bomb, and it explodes into fragments that fire upward. And flour is very similar to that, but it just makes a big explosion when it impacts. Finally, Melody fires in a sine wave pattern, and while it looks weak, when it reaches maximum level, it unleashes an enormous wave of destruction. One of the things I don't like in Cocoron is that the level design is kind of bland. There are some fun touches, like these trains that flash their light before they come out of the tunnel, and you can ride on the roof to get to higher places, but a lot of the stuff is just hopping between featureless pillars. And it doesn't help that you're probably going to backtrack on it a lot. There's also a pretty big problem with the enemies. Cocoron has a fairly small quantity of enemies. For example, you'll see these armadillos all the time. However, rather than having consistent behavior, the common enemies often have 3 or 4 different things that they could do. For example, the armadillos here just protect themselves when you hit them, but over here they emerge from their shell and parachute. And over here they come out and launch themselves at you. And here they roll up walls. There's no surefire way to know what an enemy is going to do, because while it may have just behaved one way, the new one that's appeared might do something completely different. At the very least, they could have changed their color. I mentioned that Cocoron isn't an especially difficult game. I think the hardest parts are that sometimes you just don't have the right equipment at the right moment. Like this fairy boss is much easier if you have a slim body. You get multiple tries against bosses, but on the stages if you die once it's game over. However, they do give you infinite continues. Like I mentioned, Cocoron is pretty well regarded among retro gamers in Japan, though it seems to have not sold many copies when it was released. A remake for the PC Engine CD was planned, but cancelled late in development. It would have added additional body types and weapons. There's also an annoyingly rare cartridge variant, where the game has a black shell. I have seen it for sale twice, once where someone wanted over 100,000 yen for it just because they didn't know what it was, and the other time somebody bought it out from underneath me while I had it in my cart. So prototype, later software revision, I don't know, but it is out there. I have some problems with Cocoron. I think the level design could be a lot better, and I'm not really happy with how the enemies work. And the action feels a bit clunky to me. That said, making 6 different heroes and playing through the game with them is pretty cool. So even though other aspects of the game aren't the greatest, that idea is strong enough to carry the rest of the game. It's a cool game to try out and experiment with different things, and just see what your wacky creations can do. There's nothing else quite like it on the Famicom, and honestly, I can't think of anything else quite like it anywhere.